Uachtaráin, dear President Higgins, it is our honour to present you today with the inaugural Law Society's Centre for Justice and Law Reform Medal of Excellence. Across 5 decades of public service, you have combined scholarship, political leadership, cultural vision, and principled public advocacy to shape the law, policy, and public attitudes. You have championed reforms that deepen democratic participation, protect the vulnerable, and advance equality, leaving a legacy of strengthened civil society, cultural renewal, and an unwavering defence of human dignity. Your leadership has shaped public debate on poverty, housing, migration, and the state's responsibilities towards its citizens. You have modelled how principled moral clarity can be translated into legal and political change that improves lives in tangible ways. Born in Limerick in 1941 and the first in your family to access higher education, you later lectured in sociology and political science, and you have remained an engaged public intellectual throughout your distinguished career. Elected to local office and twice serving as Mayor of Galway, you cultivated a reputation for community engagement that connected cultural regeneration with social well-being. As a long-standing parliamentarian from the 1970s through to 2011, you combined constituency work with national policy advocacy, serving in both the Seanad and Dáil Éireann. As Ireland's first dedicated Minister for the Arts, you championed cultural institutions and communications reform. Your achievements include the establishment of Telefís na Gaeilge, the reinvigoration of the Irish film sector, the repeal of broadcasting censorship under the Broadcasting Authority Act, and major investment in local arts infrastructure and the canal network. As a member of the Labour Party, you served in senior roles shaping progressive policy debates on social equality, disability rights and access to education, while retaining an independent moral voice that transcended party lines. Through poetry, essays and public addresses, you have enriched Ireland's cultural life, bringing humane, reflective language to national conversations about justice, community and the common good. Elected President of Ireland in 2011 and re-elected in 2018 with an exceptional personal mandate, you brought to the role a distinctive combination of compassion, intellectual rigour and sustained commitment to social justice and democratic norms. Your presidency has been marked by a steadfast determination to give voice to the weakest and most vulnerable, not only in Ireland, but across the globe. In a world facing profound upheaval, your principled stance on national and international issues, including the protection of fundamental rights and the rule of law, has offered a moral compass in uncertain times that has been both inspiring and deeply reassuring. The Law Society's Centre for Justice and Law Reform awards this Medal of Excellence to you in recognition of your exceptional contribution to the causes central to our mission: advancing justice, promoting thoughtful and evidence-based legal reform, and cultivating a society grounded in fairness, inclusion and equality. Your example has inspired lawyers, policymakers, activists and citizens to pursue transformative change through law, public policy and political activism. This medal, specially commissioned by the Centre and crafted by Alan Cook, symbolises our appreciation and gratitude for your intellectual rigour, your courage in confronting difficult truths, and your lifelong insistence that law must be animated by compassion and respect for human dignity. Your service has enriched Irish life and contributed to global conversations about justice and human rights. This medal recognises individuals who have demonstrated exceptional leadership, commitment and achievement in protecting fundamental rights, widening access to justice, strengthening democratic norms and advancing the rule of law. In awarding you this inaugural honour, the Centre acknowledges the innumerable and substantial contributions you've made to social justice and law reform throughout your illustrious career. We'd like to close with words that reflect upon both your own voice and the spirit of collective action that underpins our work. Every age, after all, must have its own Aisling and dream of a better, kinder, happier, shared world. Michael D. Higgins. President, on behalf of the Centre for Justice and Law Reform, the Law Society, and all who strive for a more just society, we respectfully present you with the Centre for Justice and Law Reform Medal of Excellence as a testament to your extraordinary leadership and enduring legacy.
An gedal sias ferm firkin fórsjö roviljuk go Áras an Uachtaráin. Agus opgohuirithe an ócóid a tóbhachtach seo agus cuim go rá agus spánacht ar an anad nua mar éon ahras arm ag meg tóbhacht agus tóbhacht ag buint leis agus de se banathe ar principle atá anag artam das na fialtachtainna tá am hen. May I just say, first of all, that I want to thank Eamon Harrington for his generous words. The President of the Law Society, I am so pleased also to congratulate you on the Centre for Justice and Law Reform. I think it's going to, as I have just said in Irish, it's going to make a very valuable contribution at a very, very challenging time in many ways. I'm not keen on the word challenging because it's a kind of an evasion with it. So I'm going to make a few points that I want to make myself. I'm very, very pleased that the practitioners are here, the people who deliver law to our citizens, but also, and just as important, the advocates. I think that I've spent a great deal of my time with people who are involved in the moral philosophical task of advocacy, which is so very, very important. I think I want to say just a few general remarks myself. Your very generous remarks about my own relationship to justice and law. I've been strongly of the opinion, almost since I was the very beginning as a student, all those years ago in 1962, in favour of an interdisciplinary approach to matters of justice and law. And I had the great advantage when I was shortly after being appointed in 1969 in Galway of having my office next door to Kevin Boyle. And we would occasionally do some joint courses, which we did in relation, I remember, in relation to the social influences on the writing of the Irish Constitution. But what people didn't know about the distinguished Kevin Boyle was that also he had in fact received an MA from the Rosinowitz Centre in Cambridge on his study on the sentencing practice for the Irish in Britain of the courts. So he was very, very, very sensitive to the idea of that we look at law and that we look at its perception through the different lenses of the social classes. You make reference to my own interest in it in ways. I want to just, I was thinking tonight that I'm so grateful for the honour you by conferring this medal, and I want to take that it is an award that is closer to me than many, many things, for the very reasons that I'm saying now. I remember when I started teaching sociology, which included courses. There's now the professor in Cork has in fact demolished the categories that I used to have all these huge people attending when I was teaching courses in sociology of law and deviant behaviour. We don't use that word now. But the point about it in relation to that, I had just come back from Indiana University, where I had taken the courses with Professor Turk, among others. And he really was interested, more or less, I think, in the sociology of practice of law. We would look at, for example, how different governors would seek to have a difficult case pushed over the border to save money. But as well as that, there were other things too. I visited my dear friend, Sally O'Neill Sanchez, at the invitation of Trocra. I visited a number of different difficult, very particularly in the 1980s. In the period 1982 to 87, I was a university senator, I used a lot of that time to spend a great deal of time on human rights. And one of the things that strikes me about that, there's a very neglected essay by, I think it is in The Glass Cage, which is entitled or something about the human rights visitor as tourist. And one of the things that's contained in my poems and others is very much the difficulty of leaving a situation of great conflict and great wrong. I mean, I remember I was an observer for the Institute for the Protection of Refugees and Migrants at Basel. I did for them a report on the trial of the citizens of Fatsa. And I remember very, very well visiting the scene of what people were accused of walking away. And in that sense, in many cases, there's always a responsibility beyond description. And I had the same sensation very much, and it is why I have, as it were, returned to the site of the investigation very much after the massacre of Mohote, which I wrote about with Sally O'Neill. As I say, she was from Trócaire, but it's also the case that I rather frequently had to defend Trócaire's interest in justice. There was a period of my time in public life in many cases in which they would come under heavy pressure of saying, it's all right to be talking about poverty, but justice is something else. And that raises for me a very fundamental question as I'm coming to the end of my term, as two periods as Uachtaráin President of Ireland. And there was the idea of the seeking limitations on things, which I think is a great, great error. I think that the preparation of the mind in relation to justice and law benefits not just from interdisciplinary approaches in relation to the teaching of it, but also in relation to the practice of it. I said that I was speaking to somebody from abroad just very recently, and I said, but it's the price we are paying for the neglect of philosophy. It goes right back. I won't do it this afternoon, but I'll just say it goes back to what I call the Cartesian fallacy of replacing philosophical thought by instrumental knowledge. And we are now in a very interesting thing. It is relevant to what I have to say now, very, very directly, is that we're living in an instrumental period when in fact it makes it very difficult to see the philosophical ground values upon which we might draw, for example, for an adequate discussion on human rights. And in that sense, it goes right through every aspect of our daily life, having, as I think Nietzsche wrote in his time, a certain kind of numbing effect on people, that what is ordinary, in fact, is just the way it is now, and this is happening. But I think we need a time, if we're to take fundamental concepts that are in all the fundamental but really serious discussions on human rights and the concept of dignity, for example. Is it a kind of to be an equally treated consumer? Or is there a great deal much more than that to it? And of course there is a great deal much more than that to it. And all of this leads, I think, in many cases, to the decline, if you like, in time for philosophy, the kind of the valuation of matters in terms of their instrumental efficiency, as opposed, in fact, to worth. Now, we have quite moved on from the position of Immanuel Kant in relation to that. And I think for that reason, that the centre you're setting up is so important, because it would enable people to recover, I think, the ground that we need, in fact, to readdress. I think one of the things, there are good things about Ireland, and among them, for example, are the changes I have seen happening in the prison system. I was on the original MacBride Commission, as the minister put it at the time, the self-appointed commission. And later I made submissions to the Whittaker Commission. But one of the things I do see, and as President of Ireland, I wanted to thank all those who work in the prison service, but very particular those who are teaching in the prison service, and for their approach. Why do I mention it this morning? because I have looked with absolute horror at what is happening at a global level in relation to prison conditions. There's the disgraceful conditions in the United States, which is directly related to the privatising of the prison service. There are so many. I wrote about the massacre at Mohote, and Sally and I waited 10 years for it to be acknowledged. The Inter-American Court described it as genocide, and there are 12 bodies laid out in that village after it had been denied. But I went back as President of Ireland to Salvador, and the President acknowledged what we had done in relation to drawing attention to the abuses by the state among Áras. And now I look at television and I see some of the most degrading examples of prisoners, and prisoners being sent from one jurisdiction to another, to be lying there in their underwear, some of them not properly charged, and people regarding that this is the way we have to go. You even have, in fact, as well as that, elected heads, elected people in the European Union saying that this is what they admire and so forth. So therefore I'm coming to the end of the presidencies. I describe my presidencies as, I said, I wanted them to be presidencies of ideas, but not for ideas only in an academic sense, but to be informing moral principles, and we would be able to discuss it. And your centre will have my fullest support when I have long left office, because of what my anxieties you can gather it in relation to return to these generals. I recall as well, there were humorous times as well. I covered, when I was economist for Hotpress, I covered 2 special trials in Northern Ireland. One which was conducted by the father of the current Chief Justice, and the other by Mr. Justice Carswell. I won't say any more except to say the distinction and the assumptions guiding both proceedings at the court were so obvious and were a mode of anthropological curiosity. I do think, in relation to what is happening now, in many cases, why I say it is very, very important. There was when I was teaching in 1969, one of the most popular articles in the American literature at the time was the necessary conditions for successful degradation ceremonies. And I remember bringing students to the district court in many cases and having arranged with the guard to tell me what was happening, because I couldn't hear very well at the back of the court. I would look at how, in fact, people would go through the ritual of this, of knowing which judge was in place, but also a kind of what was necessary. And you have given up the drink for life, Your Honour, and so forth. But all of this, in a way, in many cases, is that I'm very committed, as it were, to that kind of anthropological approach. Because one has to actually place the law. The law is very, very, very important. And I think the centre is focus on access to justice, economic, social and cultural rights and democratic norms. And also the quality of legal services is incredibly important. And then I think as well, there's a real interesting challenge in a way in trying to see the law and its experience and perception through the lenses of the different people who are encountering it. And certainly this is the case. We had a presentation, for example, which I read, a presentation to the Justice Committee in the Dáil on behalf of the Travellers Movement. And I was very struck by that. The Irish prisons, for example, in many cases, they spoke about the experience of travellers in prison. But sticking with the prisons for a minute, the idea that just over half, the number of our prisoners have never sat a state exam. And exactly a half having left school at the age of 15. And then again, there's prisoners in Ireland, which is a better system than many international, are 25 times more likely to come from deprived communities, indicating a very clear link between social disadvantage and crime and punishment. I want to say about that in many cases, Irish sociology disappointed me a little, because I think I gave a review in the State of the Field for the Sociological Review not so long ago. And it was, in a way, it slid away, if you like, from the structural issues. And it is one of the legacies of postmodernism, in my view, that it, in fact, trivialised to some extent the approach in relation to the moral contribution of sociology. I think that, for example, words like, for example, which will tell you just as well I'm finishing as president. I'm very unhappy with language that talks about those left behind and everything. Why? Because I couldn't philosophically justify it, because it kind of is saying that the system that is there is correct and we've just left out a few off the bus. The fact of the matter is the issues are deep and the issues are structural, and it is not a merit of even Irish history, historiography, that it found itself very difficult to deal with class. This is understandable in historiography's case because so many have left the country, and in fact actually we're really talking about the society of those who are left behind. But I have visited and sat with travellers, and particularly with some of the older ones as well, and in a way in which they would. Then I have also met people when I was at TD, people who were arguing about land. That great one thing which for the legal profession should be very grateful for all the income it has provided, but it is in fact actually an undercurrent of nearly everything. As one neighbour would say to the other, I'll have the law on you. But in fact actually looking through these different lenses makes me think then about when I use phrases like derechos humanos, human rights or whatever. I spoke as far back as 30 years ago about the importance of recognising that human rights is not a European invention. There is a pact for who don't have to go back to the Code of Hammurabi. But you must realise as well, I remember visiting Africa where somebody actually did say the phrase to me, this is where so-and-so discovered the Nile. And I did say, was it not there before? But in fact, it's the same way. Well, there were civilizations in Africa, and there were civilizations in Asia, and there were civilizations, and with them came, in fact, actually very valuable traditions and law, including traditions of right. The rights, for example, the human rights, the one I always quote is notions of generosity among the Barazzi, which is about where the man having been found guilty of stealing his neighbour's goats, the issue is how generous will his neighbour be having been vindicated and so forth. And I encountered this in a way where this current notion of concentrating, talking about whatever this mythical entity that has meaning is the West and all the rest of it. When I was at the famine in Somalia, and we were having valuable exchanges with the leaders of the clans. The clans didn't exist as something that could be consulted by many of the Western diplomats who simply didn't recognise the clan system for the very powerful mechanism in the society that it was. I say all of this in a way, and I'm coming to the end, is how we must all now work for universalism. At the root of the respect for the United Nations, at the root of all of our critique in relation to the manifest breaches of humanitarian law that have been occurring, and so forth, there is on what basis would such a universalism come from? And can it come, in fact, from a singular version of culture? Can it come as, in fact, also, and how can it be made fit with the version of modernity and modernisation that is now so comprehensively refuted by good scholarship, with the 12 Princeton studies which guided it all over the world, that you had backward countries, agricultural countries, and you had modern countries, industrial countries, and you had rural forms of life, and you had urban forms of life. This was a disastrous influence on the teaching of the subject from where I was myself for a very long time. So therefore we look for the sources of our universalism. And of course, the strongest philosophical work goes right back to Bacon and others, and it said we must look at other forms and other species, and we must in fact ask ourselves, how have we treated other species, and to the extent can we include it? What then is is at the root, for example, of our partnership in hospitality to nature, if we are to understand ecology properly and understand the new balances that we need in relation to the Sustainable Development Goal, balance between ecology and justice and so on. And all of this I kept thinking back in many, many ways. And I have in fact found myself using Theodore Adorno's work, which I never thought I would do, The Pessimist of the Frankfurt School, but I actually, even worse than that, I even found myself looking at some of the phrases of Nietzsche of his time. But I think in the way we really must see, if we are in fact to have a universalism, it has to be based on concepts, as strong concepts of dignity. And if dignity is in the sense of how we to define it in terms of seeing in the other a value or worth that is inherent to the species, as the species might be better. I have allowed myself this because the medal means so much to me in relation, because it has been so close really to issues upon which I enjoyed every day I was teaching in the university, but also I enjoyed all of the exercises I was involved in relation to human rights in different parts of the world. And as I said, that's why I would remind myself, for Vincent Burgess, the glass cage, and say that how, when you're walking away, you don't ever leave that as a topic covered or whatever. But I'm equally convinced as well, my respect for the profession and my respect for the advocates who are working for the different issues, I do know that they consider, if you like, the need when we're discussing reform is about making it better, as you have described yourself. It's about making it more inclusive. It's about better in a way that will foster social cohesion. And in the end of the day, when I think about it, you have a difficulty if you have actually the social sciences avoiding structure. And that means that those who will advise those who are opinion shapers as opposed to opinion takers will in fact will be advised from a very narrow furrow. I think, and something interesting, the most joyful thing I think really as I come after 14 years is the way that ethics, in fact, still is such a strong feeling, impetus in young people. In the first presidency, ran a consultation that involved 800 young people. It was called about being young in Ireland. And I remember very, 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 very much being moved by two young men who made a video, made an audio tape that they sent to me, and I visited them after, saying about how after one terrible event where there had been a fracas, a row, a man had fallen backwards, hit his head and died, and now their lives were changed forever. And this is, I think, one of the things during looking in the presidency, I presented the different Gaelic awards, I presented them in prisons because I wanted to acknowledge worth and to acknowledge of all the people who are doing that. And I repeat again, it's quite horrific. I remember preparing a report, for example, on Hamas and Fatah prisoners off from the West Bank. And it's very interesting how bad practices in prisons get spread throughout the world. And that is where we are now. And I am going to say to you, I take this medal, but I think it's wonderful. I should tell you, but the news is good because good work is going on. In 2021, I hosted the University of Limerick researchers Cindy Joyce, Jennifer Schwepel, and their authors Margaret O'Brien, Amanda Haynes and Oliver Riley. And they gave a valuable, empirically based Irish Travellers Access to Justice report, and I was able to respond to it. And I say this about it, people like myself who inflict these speeches and all of that, we just don't do so to be chimed by the journalist quite, although at times that is quite entertaining, because I think some would have benefited from keeping the speeches, but there it is. I think that what is very, very important is that the justice system being fair, the justice being something where people as practitioners can find satisfaction in it. And I do know, because a very large number of those students I had, a huge number of them went into law. I actually referred to one of them elsewhere, isn't that? I met him on the train as I was coming up to the door one day, and he was actually getting off at the Curragh because he had become very successful, and he owned a few four-legged wonders. And I said, and as he said to me, "And Michael D, you're still at it." Well, my hope is to be still at it for a while yet, and on all of these issues. And I very, very much look forward to with all of you, both advocates and practitioners. And too, I think that if we, in fact, look for a definition of universalism that is based on a dignity that we can find in different cultures and in different circumstances, it enables us to make stronger all the work of such people working in the Council of Europe and elsewhere. I have every confidence in your Centres for Justice and Law Reform. Agus a bhí seom cuiamach mo bhuicas live as Satan Gradam Sean for an Áras. I very, very much appreciate your honour by this very special award. Thank you.
President Higgins, thank you. On behalf of the Law Society's Centre for Justice and Law Reform and all of us gathered here this afternoon, can I extend our deepest and heartfelt thanks. It is a profound honour for us that you've accepted our invitation to receive the inaugural Medal of Excellence, and we're truly grateful for your gracious welcome to the Áras on this special occasion. Can I thank you as well for renewing our determination to pursue practical reforms that advance equality, protect human rights and improve access to justice. We've listened with interest your many insights from your words today on matters regarding philosophy and justice and fairness and dignity, and we'll carry those words into our research and advocacy, and we will strive to translate those insights into concrete action and tangible recommendations for law reform. Go and buchas o Creelat Uachtaráin.